In this lecture, we will introduce for loops. Let's start by taking a look at the format for a for loop. So you'll notice that there are some things that are similar to while loops and some things that are very different. So we have the keyword for instead of a while, and then we have our parentheses, but now we have three different things inside our parentheses instead of just one thing, and they're separated by semicolons. So we have this initialize statement, we have a condition, and then we have our update. And then we have the statements that go on afterwards if our for loop is true. The initialize statement has us initialize our loop control variable. So what we can do is we can already use some variable that we declared previously, or we can declare a new variable inside the parentheses. Now, if we do declare a new variable, it can only be used inside this loop. So if I declare something in my initialize statement, I'm not allowed to use that variable outside of the loop. Java will just say we can't find it. Our condition is just like the condition for an if statement or a while loop. It's going to be some expression that's either true or false. The update statement just simply updates our loop control variable. And just like with loops in general, this update statement should eventually get us to a place where the condition becomes false. And as I already said, the statements in here are separated by semicolons. So let's take a look at how a for loop would actually execute. And there are really just three main steps. So the first thing we're going to do is run our initialize statement. So it's going to either create some new variable or we're going to initialize our loop control variable to something. We then run our condition. So if our condition is true, then we're going to execute the body and then we'll execute the update statement. Now, if it's not true, we just simply get out of the loop. But here we're just saying if our condition is true, then run our body, and then we're going to run the update statement. And then the third step is just we keep repeating step 2 until our condition becomes false. So the idea is just simply, as long as our condition is true, we keep running our body, and at the end of the body, we're always going to run our update statement, and we just keep repeating that until we're done. Now, our for loop actually works just like a counter control while loop. In fact, they're primarily used for counter control type loops. So we can compare it with our while loop. So here's an example of a while loop that uses the counter controlled approach. So we have our int I is 0. So our initialization is that we're saying I to 0 here. We check to say as long as I is less than 10, so our condition is here. And then we do something in the loop, and then finally we update I by incrementing it by 1. Now let's take a look at the for loop. This does the exact same thing. We declare I outside the loop, which is fine, but our update statement is right here. So we're saying I to be 0. We have our condition where we set I to be less than 10. We do something in the body of the loop, and then we run our update statement. So that's all we're doing here. So we do our initialization, we check our condition. If it's true, we do something in our code, and then when we're done with doing something, we move up to the update statement, run that, and then we just go back and check our condition again. Now let's take a look at an example where using curly braces is very important when dealing with loops, especially for loops. So here's one for loop where our loop control variable is 1, and as long as it's less than or equal to 5, we will print hello and star, and then we'll increment I by 1. So this is going to print both hello and a star on separate lines 5 times. Now let's take a look at this example. So we have the same type of loop, except now we've forgotten to include the curly braces. So remember, just like with if statements and while loops, the only part that's included in the statement would be the immediate line that comes afterwards. That means only this line right here would be part of the for loop. So what happens is we'll print hello 5 times, but the star is only going to get printed once, and it's not going to be printed until after we print all of the hello statements. Unlike in our previous case, we would print hello, star, and so forth. Here, we're going to print hello 5 times, and then a star would come immediately afterwards. Let's take a look at another issue that we have to be careful with. semicolons. So here is some code that's very similar to what we've seen already. So it looks like we're going to print a star 5 times because, actually I'm sorry, 6 times, because our loop control variable starts at 0, and as long as it's less than or equal to 5, we'll print the star, right? Well, notice that we have a problem here. The semicolon is at the end of our for loop. And what this means is the loop's going to run all the iterations before going to the next line. So as long as I is less than or equal to 5, we're basically doing nothing. And we're just going to do nothing 5 times. So what happens here is our star gets printed once instead of 5 times. So we need to be very careful to make sure that we do not include the semicolon at the end of our for loop. There are a couple of other things that we need to consider when creating for loops. First, if the condition is initially false, then the body of our loop's never going to happen. This is also true for while loops as well. So if it's just false from the get-go, then we're not going to run anything inside the body of a for loop or a while loop. The update statement should change our loop control variable so that our condition becomes false. Because if our loop control variable never changes such that we get a false condition, then we're going to get an infinite loop. So we need to make sure that our loop control variable is updated eventually so that we get a false condition. Now, if we omit the condition, then we just assume that our condition is true. So if we just don't put anything in there, it's just true. So let me give you an example. This loop here is perfectly legal. We can just say for, and then nothing's in there except for 2 semicolons. Syntactically, this is correct, and this will run. But what's going to happen is we're going to print hello forever because our condition, which is supposed to be right around here, is omitted, so we just assume it's true. So therefore, we get an infinite loop. Let's take a look at a couple more examples with using for loops. So let's say we have something like this. It looks a little different than what we're used to. So now we're actually going backwards instead of going forwards with our variable. So we're going to count backwards. So we can set our initialization statement to be something other than 0. Most of the time you're going to do something like 0, but we can do something like setting it to 10. So that's what we're doing at this line here. And now instead of checking to see if I is less than or equal to some value, we can check to see if it's greater than or equal to some value. And as long as that's true, we're going to print something. And instead of increasing our variable, we can decrease it. So whenever we update our loop control variable, we never said that we always have to increment it. We can subtract the number by something as well. So in this case, we're going to start by printing 10, and then 9, and then 8, and all the way down to 1. And when it becomes 0, well, 0 is not greater than or equal to 1, we get out of the loop. Here is another example where we're incrementing our loop control variable by some fixed number instead of just 1. So the first 2 parts, the initialization and the condition, are pretty similar to what we're used to. The difference is now our update statement. So instead of incrementing I by 1, we're incrementing I by 2. Once again, there's nothing that says we can't do that. I mean, we can change I to be whatever we want. So here we're just saying set I equal to I plus 2. And then we just print out our I. So in this case, we would print 0, 2, 4, 6, or pretty much all even numbers up to, but not including 20.